Oh, hi there. I didn't see you come in. I was thinking, now I'm laughing because I was thinking about when I was a little girl and I used to watch a children's TV show here in Canada called Mr. Dress Up. And Mr. Dress Up was this guy, gentleman who would dress up in fun costumes. He made crafts. He had these puppet friends and he drew. And Mr. Dressup's drawings were always so awesome because he would start with this line and you didn't know what it was gonna turn into. And I think some of my very earliest exposure to artists was watching Mr. Dressup. And whenever he started the show, it was kind of that thing where he's busy doing stuff and then he looks up and he's like, oh, hello, there you are. Let's get doing stuff. So here we are, we're gonna do some stuff. And welcome to today's live recap. Yeah, hi. Robin's not here today. I'm hoping you can hear me. And there we go. And I'm kind of keeping an eye on the chat at the same time as doing my lesson here. Robin is not here today. She is the lucky stinker is doing a workshop with Andy Evanson this week. I'm extremely jealous. I told her she was going to have to live stream the whole thing to me, and she has not followed through on that. So I just I'll get to hear about it when she gets back from her trip. Okay, so we are here. Oh, and I love your comments on Mr. Dressup. He's definitely a important part of Canadian culture. Mr. Rogers in the US. I'm sure you had other characters in the UK and in Australia that were part of your growing up childhood as well. And I love talking or remembering how those things shaped us. And I don't draw like Mr. Dressup, and yet I still think that his creativity, it meant something to me as a child, and I think that's pretty cool. Anyhow. So here we are. We're going to go through, take a look back over week 3. We're going to talk about the big stuff we learned. There's so much just as you start digging into color. It's a big topic, and that's a good thing. And you know me already. I'm all about finding the positives. I think there's always an opportunity. There's always a positive in every situation. So that means when you know only a tiny bit about a topic, that means you've got a lot you can learn and you get to grow really quickly. And the whole idea here, again, we are in this journey, and I use the word journey. I know it's cliche, but it is a journey. We are here for life. Whatever time you may have left, and none of us have any guarantees. So we pursue painting for what purpose? To bring ourselves joy, to find that creative therapy, to meet that deep inner need that says, I gotta make something. Like I see something beautiful and I'm motivated to respond. That's a big one for me. And so it's not about being good. It's not about getting better. It's just about trying to get closer to that truth. And so yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking about. Oh, I love the comments, and I could get really distracted by talk of children's television, trying to resist the urge. Yes, I remember The Friendly Giant too. I am that old. I think it's just such great memories of childhood. Okay, so we're going to talk about color and value. I have notes, and just don't forget that my notes will be shared on the community site so that you can print them off and have them in a legible format instead of having to remember my ramblings. We are moving into week 4. Tomorrow those lessons will drip out, and as that happens, I want you to think about week 4 as your opportunity to put together some of the big stuff you've learned in weeks 2 and 3. We learned about value in week 2. We developed NOTANs and value studies to make our paintings stronger, to understand the underlying framework of our paintings. And then this week we learned about color and how color impacts mood in our paintings. Just think of those little color studies, and I think because they're little, it's really easy to want to kind of think of them as not being super important, but they're hugely impactful in just informing the choices that we make in our colors and seeing the difference of mood that's created, time of day, mood, just the emotion that they bring out in those little studies just by changing one color. I'm sorry to hear YouTube is cutting in and out. I'm just going to add a quick thing to the chat in case I disappear entirely. Oh, I forgot to plug in a cord, so I think I can make it better in just a second. Yeah, just bear with me. I forgot to plug in my Ethernet cord, and it's using my wireless Wi-Fi, which of course isn't as secure. So I apologize. Quickly fixing it. Okay, I'm hoping that will resolve any YouTube cutting in and out issues. I've just improved my, there we go. Okay, I hope you didn't lose me completely. I've just tried to connect and I'm really hoping it's still working. Okay, let me know if I've disappeared completely. There we go. Okay. Technical issues always happen when I'm not. Oh, good. Holly says she still has me, so we're good. If Holly has me, I'm sure all the rest of you do too. If not, if anyone is commenting in the chat that they're having trouble hearing or seeing the video, if those of you who are there chatting can just mention that they should reload their internet browser, that's the most important, biggest thing you can do if there's technical issues is just reload your browser. Okay, continuing on. Oh, where were we? Value and color. Value establishes form. We see the shapes of our objects and we can tell that they're functioning as what they're supposed to be when we vary the values in our painting. And color establishes mood, how the painting feels. I mentioned some books on color I like in the resource guide for the lesson. I'm just going to reiterate them again. Nita Leland's Confident Color. She has another color book, I believe, and I haven't actually seen it, so I can't really tell you which one is better. The one I have, I really like. Jeannie Doby's Making Colors Sing, and Stephen Quiller's Color Choices are 3 books that I really love on color. You also, I also linked up in the notes that you can download after the video in the community. Some tools I like. Stephen Quiller makes an amazing color wheel. There's the Ultimate 3-in-1 Color Tool, which I showed you in the lesson. I don't think I have it nearby now. I've been cleaning up. The studio's been a disaster. And my Color Evaluator plastic filters. And they're just a green and a red plastic filter. They're a stiff plastic. I actually bought it in a quilt shop and really helpful for helping you to see value. Value tells us some things about color that you might not see just by glancing at it without thinking. Okay, and so as we move into week 4, and I want to go over, I'm going to share some of the paintings that you've worked on this week and some of my thoughts about them. The paintings that I share, I wish I could share so many more than I do. When I start showing student work, it's really hard to know when to stop, because some of the things you're learning are so evident in your paintings. And I'm so proud of you for pushing through and the things you're accomplishing. You have this intention and focus in your work, while at the same time looking inward to think, what do I want? And I love seeing that in your work. Often I can see your emotions in your paintings. I can see the areas where you had self-doubt. Those are usually the areas that look a little overworked or kind of fuzzy because you were lifting too much. Often that's, or maybe a lot of busy little brush strokes because you just knew it needed something and you weren't sure what. So I can see that often in your work. I can kind of read your thought process in your paintings, and I think that's really amazing. It gives me help. It helps me as an instructor to be able to give some insights onto how to frame your mindset, not just areas to strengthen your paintings and principles of design and art, but actually how you're thinking about your painting as you're painting it. One thing that I've noticed And I really notice this when I'm teaching a beginner course here in my studio, when I'm teaching in person, and I get to watch my students just problem solve their way through a painting, is that we have to think about what the painting needs, not just about what we want to happen. And Nancy Hillis calls this the adjacent possible, where you're reacting, where you're in a state of almost continually reacting to what's happening on the paper. You're reconciling your intention for the painting with what you're actually seeing on the page. And when you are able to do that, network between your outcome and your process, amazing things can happen. Beautiful things can happen, and things that are unexpected that you didn't expect. Yeah, unexpected that you didn't expect, that you didn't anticipate, and that maybe were better than you dreamed. It rarely works to try to force the painting to bend to your will. If watercolor, and maybe this is a part of the learning process that I've learned over years of painting, that there are certain things I just can't make watercolor do. There are times when I can see the paint moving in a certain direction, and I know that if I try to stop it and move it in another way, it's going to fight me and look fussed over and forced. What I've found is that when things start to happen that feel out of my control, I'm better off working with what is happening than instead of trying to change it. That's why sometimes you'll see me, I'll be painting and something goes on too dark, and rather than blotting and lifting, which is kind of taking a step back, I step forward into that. I flood that area with water, and that moves the color more, and then, softens it and bleeds it out and dilutes it a bit as well. So, I'm working with it instead of trying to step back and backpedal. I think it's a lot like when I had little toddlers in the house. Actually, it's probably the same with raising teenagers, come to think of it. When I when I had toddlers in the house, you'd say to your kid, put your shoes on, and they'd say no. But if you said something like, do you want to put your shoes on first or your jacket? Then they had this illusion of choice, and they were much more likely to actually do what what you'd like them to do. And I think toddlers heard better when they think that what is happening is their idea. And in watercolor, we have to kind of do that too. We want to work to the possible instead of trying to backpedal and fix things or force things to our will. What this might look like in your painting is you have different stages of the painting where different things need to happen. In the first layer, most of us don't have a lot of trouble making a first layer for our painting. We start with a plan, we might start with a reference photo, and we create this soft, loose wash with lots of promise. As we go into the second layer, we start thinking about the details. We still have a plan in mind, but as the painting evolves, our painting is going to go better if our plan evolves with the painting. If we pull back from our original idea and let the painting dictate what should happen next. I was just commenting, and I don't think I put it in my list of paintings to show it to you, but I was just commenting, one of the students had posted magnolias, and I'm sorry, I forget your name, I was just looking at it. And the magnolias were beautiful, and magnolias are a very crisp, strongly defined floral shape. The petals are so, and I've never seen one in life, but from what I've seen in reference photos, the petals are so crisp and clean. They've got very clean lines, very strong form. And so our plan usually is to paint those with a lot of definition. But in this particular painting, because her colors were so right on, they really matched what I've seen of magnolias, again, from reference photos. She had a little more freedom to soften some edges and connect the background and the flowers together. Recognizing that in your painting and going, you know what, I could get away with some softness here. That's this maturity that we get as we learn to accommodate the different possibilities that emerge as we're painting. And it's not the only way to do things. That's the other part. All watercolor, all paintings are experimentation. There's, when a new direction suggests itself, you get to choose if you're going to follow that direction or not. On my YouTube channel, you'll often see me painting these intuitive washes, and I get comments, like dozens of comments of people seeing things in those washes. Oh, I see a unicorn. I see an old man's face. I see a cat. And I get to decide which of those ideas I'm going to develop, if any of them. And it's good to know that you have the freedom. There's these infinite possibilities, and you get to choose. Oh, Judy, yeah, that was you. Cool. You've been actually, Judy, I've loved seeing what you've been posting lately. I can just see the learning is just like flooding in for you, and that's so exciting to see as an instructor. You're not the only one. Okay, so our ability to problem solve, and all painting is problem solving. Number one problem, how do I get that idea in my head out onto that blank piece of paper? And then how do I react to that brush stroke that just went on the page? And our ability to problem solve will grow as we choose a flexible approach that takes guidance from the painting that is emerging before us. Our experiments, the what ifs that we pursue, even when they don't turn out, they add to our body of knowledge. They provide tools that we can use in our problem-solving painting development. We want to be good problem solvers. We have to take the time to solve a lot of problems. So we create new problems when we take risks in our paintings, but those problems really inform and strengthen our ability to, our flexibility and what we have to offer to our paintings. Okay. I have so many things I want to tell you about. Okay, so we're moving into week 4, and we'll talk about that in a minute, how to take week 2 and 3 and apply them to week 4. But before we do that, let's switch over. And I'm really hoping we'll have time to paint today, so I'm kind of trying to move through this quite quickly. We're going to switch over to the slideshow, which is, push the button, switch this screen, push another button. Here we go, Dropbox. This is where I place your paintings. Okay, Amelia shared this color study, and as I was saying, we learn a lot by experimenting with different colors. But what I wanted to point out from Amelia's paintings here is the one on the top, and I think part of it is the reflection of the light, but I just wanted to point out how strong the contrast is on the upper right part of this painting. Really, really powerful. The lightest value and the darkest values are side by side, and look at how that makes that painting just so much brighter and more like your eye just doesn't want to go away from it to look at the other two paintings. We really see a lot of power in those contrasts, even though in that upper painting, the values that Amelia's used, the dark values aren't very dark at all. But it's the strength of those contrasts that gives that little study so much impact. Okay, next one is Anne's painting. And I thought Anne's, again, beautiful command of color here in terms of working with pure colors and working with neutrals. Anne has chosen wisely, because this is a sunset scene, to mute or neutralize the colors in her landscape, especially in the foreground as you're near to the viewer. If you're standing observing a sunset, usually you're standing in shadow. Unless you're like up on a hill or something, maybe looking at a sunset from a higher vantage point. But if you're standing on the ground, you're most likely, if you're in a sunset situation, you're going to be in shadow. The colors are going to be desaturated and moody. Well, the sunset itself is really brilliant. The exception here is that her cliffs are more illuminated. Again, they're higher. So if she was standing on the cliffs, she might be in sunlight. But because we're standing on the landscape, those neutral colors, those muted tones and darker values help make the sunset look more luminous. Good observation. Sunsets are tough. So this is one of those things I want to point out to help us to remember how to handle the light in the sunset. And that's all color theory, using both pure and muted neutral colors in a painting to give that sense of time and place. Okay, Heather, these were just so fun to look at. Look at how, even though the upper right painting doesn't have really a recognizable object in it, it is really the first thing our eyes go to. Again, strong contrasts, pops of warm and cool, the warm in the lighter areas, and then the cooler values, cooler colors rather, in the darks. And she's got warm darks in there as well. Each of these paintings as well feels connected. There's some, color unity there where the colors are connected with each other, and that's kind of cool to see as well. We can create a body of work, a cohesive theme. If you're painting for a collection to be hung together, using the same colors is a really good way to unite those, even if the subject matters are very different. Heidi, there's two here and it's not showing me them in order. Heidi posted this and I wanted to point it out because Heidi has used opaque colors to add highlights in her scene, and look at how powerful those opaque marks are. The Chinese white, there's also some, I think, cadmium yellow, and those opaques are instantly, your eye goes to those. Really, it's a good thing to know because it will help you use your opaque colors more intentionally toward the end of the painting. I especially like, and I'm not sure if you can see my little cursor here, this area here where there's some little spots of yellow and white that create leaves here. And then another student shared a vertical cropping, which actually brings out those little spots of yellow light. And I'll just pop that a little bit bigger. And I thought that was really cool how just cropping it again made it just change the scene, and I think gave it probably more impact. Look at how the verticals of the trees and then the leaning one in behind, all of those things kind of point you to that cluster of yellow leaves, that big blazing yellow bush. That's pretty cool. So don't be afraid to play with cropping. Even though you've spent hours on your painting and you might feel like you're losing something, cropping your painting to make it stronger is a win. It's a gain. Not that I'm saying this isn't working and Heidi might choose to keep it this size, but that's that idea that you can play with your crops, with your formats, try it under different shapes of mats or different sizes of mat board, and see what pops out when you start moving around those edges to bring out different focal points. Jacinta shared this painting, and she actually shared several of the gladiolas, and this is actually the most detailed of the bunch. I really liked how you developed this, Jacinta, in those successive paintings. But in this one, you had commented you were wondering about becoming more abstract. And so I'm going to talk about that I'm going to do a demonstration here in a few minutes. And I'm going to talk about how to abstract from a more realistic subject matter. So just really what you have in this one is a strong vertical, and I would work with that. And I'll show you what I mean in a minute or two. Joan shared this one just barely, and I just thought it was so, I just love the marks, the brush marks that you created here, Joan. I thought they were really beautiful. We have your reference photo directly to the right of the painting, and I love the way you saw deeper than just the surface color where the average person might just see a gray tree trunk, and you could see greens and reds in that tree trunk and use them to make your tree trunk more compelling. I also love the brush marks that you used in this painting. There's a ton of texture here, and it reminds me a little bit of Van Gogh, which I think is really cool. And Judy, I had to share this one of yours. I know you're here today. Judy had multiple versions of this scene, and I just thought they were showed so much growth and development. Look at how beautiful the mountain is in this version, how strong it is. That little curve of dark cloud coming off the point of the mountain is really powerful, and it just kind of keeps bringing your eye back to that beautiful, strong, dominant mountain shape. I did comment in the community that I thought the the line of water. The whites there could be softened just a little bit or glazed over just so they're slightly darker, just because I want my eye to keep coming back to the beauty of the mountain itself. And I like this simplified version as well. Every exploration is giving Judy new information that she can use to make her paintings stronger. And that's the reason that we do revisions, we redo paintings. We work from the same reference photo repeatedly. We want to paint stronger paintings, and we want to get to the heart of what we want to say. Okay, Chris, I had to share this one of Chris's because just look at it. Chris commented, she has her no-tan here on the right, and she commented that she really relied on the no-tan when she did the painting. With this painting, the other thing Chris did really well, because her values, her contrasts are really good here. They show, they really bring your eye into the painting. Those two little figures down on the water on the beach bring your eye back to the foreground, and then you go back to that strong dominant shape of the pier. So we have this movement, and then there's actually that little dark mark. I think that might be another person in the surf there, and that also helps kind of provide a transition point as our eye is moving back and forth between pier and figures. But Chris's colors are also really beautifully done. We have this slash of warm beach just down at the very bottom. We have the really cool colors through the rest of the painting, and then that warm or hot red in the pier, in the roof of the pier there. And that red is a dark value, and it's slightly cooled off, it's slightly muted, so it doesn't scream at you. It fits, everything fits together beautifully here, and I just thought this was amazing. I don't think it's a large painting, so I don't know how long it took you, Chris, to paint it. That's the really neat thing, is you can make beautiful, compelling paintings in just these short and evocative sketches. And then, okay, I had to share this one as well. Susan used this is just a simple color study, letting color flow. But I wanted to point out that it is the values here that make this painting work beautifully. It's not a thing, but yet it has form because the watermarks created edges in the scene. And that just, look at how your eye kind of gracefully transitions and this beautiful gliding way from the lower part of the lower corner of the painting up toward the upper corner, and then back down. It kind of zigzags through. That's actually a really good transition to our lesson that I'm going to share with you just now. So we're going to move over to my work surface so we can talk about how we might apply some of this stuff to our paintings. And as I'm doing that, I'm just going to quickly look over the chat and make sure there's nobody going panicky, saying they can't hear me or something. I'm always just, if I'm looking at something other than the screen, I might miss one of those things. Okay, so let's take a look. I've got some florals here because we've been mostly talking about landscapes, and we'll go there in just a second. And I better move my microphone. And I better move my coffee so I don't put my paintbrush in it as well. Okay, so we've looked at color this week, and I've been talking about how week 4 brings together value and color to create strong paintings. When we use value and color intentionally, we get to see our paintings evolve. And I actually pulled this sketchbook out. I haven't looked at it in a while. But I'm so glad I did, because I found this study for paintings that I've done, and I found value studies and no-tans, and I think these might have been created before I knew what no-tans were. So we'll go back to that in a second. We'll start here. Okay, so no-tans are really helpful for helping you to see the underlying framework of the scene. And I've just shown here in these 4 sketches compositions that I like to use, actually, and you might see these as repeated elements in my paintings. Very frequently, I will do a painting with a strong vertical And it's bisected usually by, a lesser shape that is more horizontal. I really love working on the diagonal, so you'll often see my paintings with a strong diagonal shape. I commented in Chris's painting just a minute ago about how she had that one strong shape of the pier, and then she had those two lesser shapes of the figures forming basically a triangle at 3 points where your eye moves through the painting. In this case, my triangle is a strong shape here and then two lesser shapes here that move the eye through the painting. But I do look for those visuals so that you have that bold shape and then something to echo and move your eye elsewhere and through the painting. And then a circular shape. And actually Len had done a sketch or just a color study in the community that he shared, which was a circular shape on a rectangular piece of paper, which gives you a little more breathing room. And what I really liked about Len's circular shape as well was that you notice this circle goes off the edges of my framework here. If I'm painting a circle and it's sitting right inside my paper and it's not touching anywhere, it's going to feel a lot like a bullseye. It's going to feel unresolved. And probably just, I don't know, too cliche maybe? Is that the right way to think of it? Okay, so some value studies, and these are older ones. Actually, these are from my tropical vacation course that I did a while ago. And you can see how the value studies help us to determine how the eye moves into the painting. This was how I chose between 3 different photographs. This one had strong darks towards the back. And in my value study, I was able to see those relationships and how the darks and the middle values and the light values work together. This one had strong darks in the foreground. And then I got to decide what I preferred. This one didn't really have a strong focal point. And so I would have, if I were to develop something like this, I would want to figure out what I was missing. I need a focal point. I need a way to anchor the viewer in the scene. Right now they're just going right out of the painting. They're following that line and there's no stopping place to bring you back into the painting. My value studies frequently turn out looking a lot like this. Very loose, very indistinguishable really as objects. And I think that's a good thing. What we want to see is that we want to have an armature for our painting. And if you're a sculptor, you'll know an armature is basically if you're sculpting a figure, an armature is the wire skeleton of that sculpture. You might create with wire the shape that you want and then cover it with clay to follow and conform to those shapes and then build your detail upon that. In painting, our armature is our notan and our value study. And a notan, and I did have a permanent marker with me, just a sec. So let's take a look at this. I keep cleaning up my studio and then all the things I need are missing. Let's take a look at this peony. Peonies are really complex and we tend to get really overwhelmed when we see an object like this because of all the little details. So I would start then by squinting at my peony or maybe using a value checker, one of those red or green filters to help me see the values in the scene. And then I create my notan. I'm going to make it really small because I have a finer point black marker. Squinting at it, I can see where the light falls. And remember, with a notan, we want to draw around the light. So I can see this dark corner here. I see this area here. There's a dark value here. And I have to decide if I want to keep that leaf in the scene. And then more shadows in here. And then I have to decide in my notan, do I want to leave it as simple as that? Or do I want to work as though my peony were my main focal point? And I'm really good at drawing rectangles, as you can see. They're very perfectly proportioned. If I were to draw just the light falling on the main peony, that light might look like that. And there's a little bit of shape here. and a little bit here, and a little here. Oops, I just covered that up so we won't worry about it. And maybe an edge here. Excuse me. And maybe an edge here. And then let's fill in the rest. And I would almost rather overdo my darks in a no-tan and just leave the barest suggestion of the light values. I'm not sure I have a good reason to explain why I would do that, except for it really helps me to see where the impact is. There's going to be a bit of shadow here, and a bit of shadow there, and a bit of shadow there. So you can see how you can start finding even more shadows. And that is sort of working, but I can also see that I might be better off cropping my picture so that the peony fits differently on the page. Maybe if I'm focusing on the peony, I want to lose, we're going to use some tape to do it. Maybe I want to go up right up to there and right up to here so that the peony fills more of the page. And that kind of makes more sense to me. Now this is terrible watercolor paper, but we're going to use it to do our value study. And a value study doesn't have to be the first place you go. You might decide you want to do a color study first and then just play with a really, fairly small version. Let's draw some proportions for us to fit the peony inside of. Because if you have a big full sheet of paper, your temptation is going to be to fill it, even if it's not proportional to, I want a more square format for my peony. Let's see what I've got for color here. Sodalite Genuine. Where's my indigo? Neutral tint. There's the indigo. For some reason, I have not yet put Payne's Gray into my palette. And I like to paint the very darkest darks first of all. So we'll start there. Darkest value there. Darkest value in here. And then we'll just get gradually lighter as we move up this way. And limit your time. I've talked about this, but it just bears repeating. You'll actually have a more effective study if you're limited as to how long you spend on it. It'll help you become a good editor. It's like a journalist working on a deadline. If you're on a deadline, you gotta get down to the important stuff, or maybe you have a space constraint. Again, if you're a journalist and you've been given 500 words to write an article, you're gonna approach it differently than if you have 1,000 or 10,000 words, or you're writing your novel or your dissertation. So we work to our constraints, and it helps us to be better at editing. And also it helps us, hopefully helps us to paint more confidently when we go into finishing the painting, especially because if you can see an impactful result in a simplified version, it helps you have the confidence that you don't need to fuss and overwork your painting. Let's just go kind of with our lightest values here. We looking for those very basic shapes and trying not to lose our lightest values. And then I might decide to exaggerate my darks. There's a dark there. There's a dark there. There's a dark up here. And the indigo really flows, so I might see it kind of flow out of my control, and that's okay. That might help me loosen up as well. There's a little bit of darker value looking into the flower here. When I'm painting a detailed flower, one of these flowers with a lot of depths, I try to remind myself that the areas where the petals are most tightly clustered together is the area of darkest value, the most shadows. So that gives me an idea of what it might look like to paint this flower in that extreme close-up. And I don't have, an idea of colors here, so that's where I would go with the next version. Just trying to breathe and remember how to think about what colors I'd like to use. I'm going to work with Quin Magenta. And this is a value study with the aid of some color. So we're still focusing on values, but we're starting to work with color as well. And I might need to choose a yellow for there's some areas that are kind of peachy. So we look for a yellow to use, and I didn't pick up very much on my brush. And I'm going to let it mix on the paper because generally you get a more luminous result if your colors are mixed right on the paper. And remembering that I can build up my darks as I progress. I'm also going to need to choose a shadow color. You know, what hue do I use to create the shadows that are down in here? Maybe I use some Verdite or blue. And I'm kind of liking those little brush strokes. So I'm also starting to evolve some strategies for depicting those fluffy petals without going, without even knowing it actually, because you know, I'm painting this again. It's the second time I've painted it in a couple of minutes. And I have no paper towel. Just use it to catch drips off my brush so that when I come in, if I've already painted a little bit here and I've got wet paper, sometimes I want my brush to not introduce more water. I want to work with the water that's already on the paper instead of making it wetter. And let's work with some darks as well. I'm going to use phthalo turquoise to start getting those rich dark values in, and maybe a little indigo with it, so then I can really get some gorgeous contrasts in. And over here. And one thing you need to be aware of is your painting will change every time you paint it, and not always for the better. Sometimes, you know, just the slightest change in my proportions. Sometimes using the paper towel to dab your brush helps you to know that there's actually more color on there than you thought. I haven't cleaned the brush properly yet, and I don't want that phthalo turquoise getting into my pale, there we go, my magentas. And little pop of magenta there. So exploring the colors. And there's freedom in these studies because we know we can learn a lot in just a few minutes. And I keep poking my mic. If you hear banging, that's what it is. The end of my brush. And then I look for places to show more shadows as well. And I've lost my light values, so already I'm seeing that it might be very possible that I should have put more little whites in here, left more whites behind. It doesn't mean I'm going to abandon the painting and stop, because sometimes what you learn in that is that some of the things that you think were essential to the painting aren't as essential as you thought. And sometimes by pushing contrasts in another area, you can redeem those areas that you lost your light values in. And there's always a little lifting, really gently. Now notice also that the white spots in my painting really show, really stand out. There we have edges. And that's one thing I don't know that I've talked about enough in this course, is the role of edges in your painting. Anywhere you have a crisp edge, the eye goes right to. And I was sharing that, I think, with Susan's painting just a few minutes ago, how even though it was just a color study of flowing colors, the watermarks and edges guided the eye and gave form to that painting. And we do the same thing in our paintings, whether they're abstracts or landscapes or florals. The edges show our eye where to go. In this peony, I might decide that my white values, they do need to be placed around the focal point so the eye goes into the flower. This is the lightest area. We might also see that there's a white edge here, white edges here, white edges here, almost in a spiral. And so I could intentionally place those whites, the strongest whites, so that the eye goes right around into the center of the painting. And if I was better at painting peonies, that's probably what I would do. From here, I get to decide where to go next. How do I want to simplify? How do I want to exaggerate? Am I happy with the colors I've chosen? And how do I want to develop that as a finished painting? I want to bring all of these things together, and then I want to improvise. So right now we have a peony, but maybe down the road, what I might see is, actually, let's see if we can fool around with this further. We all have time, right? Yeah, why not? Okay, so I'm grabbing another piece of paper. Let's say we've decided that we like the idea of painting a peony, but we want to abstract it further. And I'm not sure this is going to be successful. Taking a risk and jumping out on a limb here, folks. And we're going to just see where it goes. So we're going to start with that beautiful, strong, dark shape. I really like the phthalo turquoise. And I love the edges of a peony. So we're going to think about our armature. Going back to our no tan here, and thinking of that as the basis for whatever this becomes. So we have a strong dark shape that's going to fill, and again, I'm not on a square piece of paper because I just grabbed one of my Blick Premier blocks. Let's just put some tape on it to make it a square. Not too late. Right about right about there. Okay, so that tape will help me have some context, some place to move to. Let's use Nicolezo yellow. I feel the need for yellow and phthalo turquoise because look at that. So I'm going to try to keep that spiral of light that I mentioned just a minute ago. And we're going to try not to think about this as a peony, so turn that over. And this is something I've been thinking about a lot this week, is the possibility, the potential I have for completely ruining this and making something that looks really terrible and amateur. There's always a risk that I'm going to make a really bad painting. Especially if I'm trying to be experimental. Probably I've been painting long enough that most of what I paint, if I have, I can paint stuff that looks like stuff. I can make a painting that looks realistic and that you can tell it's what it is supposed to be. And, somebody might see a local landscape and, say, oh, that's a nice local landscape. But when I want to get to the heart of what I want to say as an artist, there's a lot of ugliness that can happen in experimentation. And that ugliness is really not something to be afraid of or something to be nervous about. Shelley says we can't learn without risk-taking, right? And it's true. And it's not just that, but I think the work I'm making today, that is my best work, that I'm incredibly proud of, if it's completely authentic and from the heart, it's going to have staying power. There are paintings that I painted 10 years ago that are still marvelously valid today. I'm trying to decide what additional color to add to this, and I'm not sure. But the work that I make right now that's competent, that maybe has a little less of my heart in it, That work I'm going to be not as proud of in 5 years, in 10 years. It's going to, I'll have surpassed whatever I was able to accomplish back then. I'm going for a red. I think it's wrong, but we're going to do it anyhow. Okay, so, and my stomach just growled really loud, so I think it's supper, it's lunchtime. Anyhow, okay, so as I was saying though, the work I'm making now is going to look less than what I'm going to be making 10 years from now. It's just the nature of growth. And so the stuff that's trying to be born to be that future work, I don't recognize it right now. I don't know what my work is going to look like 10 years down the road, 5 years down the road. And so all I have is what feels right and familiar right now. And I'm really just mostly trying to think about that armature, that kind of spiral of light values that I want to have, and then just place my colors where they feel good. And it's kind of a muddy red when mixed with this yellow. But I think that's okay. Not everything needs to be vibrant and dominant. Anyhow, so I want to make peace with the ugly stuff, because that's the stuff that isn't born yet. That's the art that I don't recognize in the future work that I don't recognize yet. And I think it can be really exciting to envision what your art might become. And I was looking at some older paintings, things that I really like now, but at the time, I wasn't sure. Like, it just I didn't feel ready. I thought maybe people wouldn't understand it. Some of them I liked, but I didn't understand why. Some of them are not good paintings, and yet they still held the seeds. There's hints in the colors and the brush strokes and the shapes that I was using that are now a part of my current paintings. And I think that's kind of a cool thing to realize. I'm going to stop right there. I kind of like that. I like this feeling of light. I'm not sure about these two white shapes. They're really dominant, and yet I kind of like them anyhow. Well, we'll soften them a little bit. Just push some of that red out. And then there's a real puddle of color right here, so I'm going to actually decrease some of the liquid in this area so that I don't get those strong watermarks that often happen. Just a little blotting, just to lift. I really like this pattern of little dots right here. Okay, so I'm just going to switch the camera over, and we're going to spend a few minutes talking as we think about next week. And there we go. Okay. Whew. Okay. DSL art comments. I thought we always started light in watercolor. Actually, I frequently like to think about my darks from an early stage. We do that in our value study often. And there are times when, I place those darks in first because they give me a point of reference. If I have my white paper, which is my lightest value, and my darkest dark on the page, then I know that everything else needs to fall somewhere in between. Because often if you are overworking your painting and getting too dark and losing your light values, it's because you don't have that stopping place to say, oh, this is the darkest I'm willing to go in this painting. So sometimes it's really helpful to place those dark values and then work around both the darks and the lights with your middle values. And usually your middle values are going to take up the majority of the real estate on your piece of paper. Okay, I'm taking your questions now, so you can start throwing them up in the chat. I'm grabbing my notes as well. I have a winner, this week's winner of our engagement in the community. Basically, what I do is our top 20 active participants. I pick one of you to be a winner each week. And this week it's Brenda HM. I think you're Paint Lady here on YouTube. And congratulations, you have won a copy of The Artist's Journey by Nancy Hillis and Jeannie Doby's Making Colors Sing. So I'm going to send you some books. If you have either of those books, Brenda, let me know, and I have some alternatives to suggest and recommend for you. So email me with your mailing address, and we'll work on getting that out to you. Congratulations. I wish I could send you all a prize, but you know what? You are winning, all of you. If you're painting, and I'm not saying if you're painting 5 hours a week or if you're painting 10 paintings a week or whatever, if you are painting, period, you are winning. You are learning things every time you paint. You are growing your knowledge. And for so many years, I can't tell you how long, I felt like I was doing it wrong. I felt like I was just not going to achieve what I wanted to achieve in watercolor because I wasn't academic about how I learned, because I wasn't doing these really structured growth templates, I guess. I don't know a better word for it. I wasn't pursuing my artistic growth in an academic way. And I was very non-linear. So we're learning stuff in order here as a class. We're learning about value, and we're learning about color, and we're learning about line and so forth. But we are also learning, we also get to learn in our own time. So somebody who's ready to learn about value, maybe you're learning about value and really absorbing and internalizing that before you learn about color. And somebody else might be learning amazing stuff about color and have yet to develop their value language. And so be patient with yourself and the fact that we all learn at different speeds in different orders, and it's okay. Just the act of doing is adding to that toolbox, that body of knowledge that we gain as we problem solve our way through our paintings. Okay, I've got a bunch of questions and I'm going to try to get to them. DSL, you had some really good questions that I don't want to miss any. So, okay, I answered the one. Shelley, you asked, does the dark to light process work best on florals rather than landscapes? I'm not really, I wouldn't call it a dark to light as much as point of reference painting. Does that make sense? Put some of those darks down just so, to give you that frame of reference. I do it with landscapes too, actually, fairly often. At the same time, if you are more comfortable, if you're more comfortable with working in lighter values, like starting with that light kind of placeholder first wash where you establish all those major shapes, that's a good way to work as well. But I think actually in landscapes, you can really establish the depth of your scene by intentionally placing those dark values. Give it a try. Just see what works for you. Okay, DSL, you asked also, do we fill the wells of the palette to the top with watercolor paint? Because if it hardens, you just re-wet it all again. I think I am being stingy with my paint. One thing I've noticed with newer painters often is that when I'm painting, I do tend to have a pretty decent amount of pigment on my brush. Even if I want to work with diluted colors, that first stroke of brush of color is going to be a rich saturation. It's just going to be a really small amount. And then if I need a lot of rich color, then I'm going to load the brush with rich pigment and then add water to dilute and let it flow. In the palette, if you only have a tiny little dab of paint in there, it's just way harder to pick up a good saturation of color. So I do actually really find that I like having a lot of color in my palette. These palette wells from my Robax palette are really big. In fact, a full tube of color will not fill that, like a 15 mil tube will not fill that to the top. So you don't have to fill it full, but if you have a good amount of pigment in your palette, you're just gonna get richer colors because it's easier to get the amount of paint that you need. The exception, if you're in a climate where your paints mold because it's really humid, Daniel Smith says clove oil inside of your palette, put it on a sponge or a piece of paper towel or something and put that in your covered palette, and that will help keep the mold from growing. Or you might just find that you prefer to work with pure fresh pigment every time. There are kind of new issues that are developed as if you're using fresh pigment from the tube, like what do you do with the leftover pigment, and make sure you're not getting it ingrained in, or getting so much loaded on your brush that it gets washed away in your paint water, any excess. So you want to watch out for that. And certain paint brands don't like being squeezed out into a palette from your tube. Actually, the only brand I know that uses a different formulation for their tube paint and their pan paint is Winsor and Newton. Their Winsor and Newton tube paint tends to dry really hard in the palette, and then it's just really hard to get a nice amount of color onto your brush when you re-wet it. So hopefully that is helpful. Martin asks, is it helpful to limit our palette? What you saw as I was painting today and choosing colors is that I was choosing a limited amount of colors from my big, enormous watercolor palette. My palette holds 64 colors, but when I'm painting, I do tend to try to use a limited range of those colors. And that's where the color study is really helpful. Experiment with working with triads, starting with just 3 colors, and developing your color mixing language, your ability to improvise and mix colors based on those triads. And the more you practice mixing colors, the more competent and confidently you will use color in your paintings. Marilyn asks, do you consider your floral an abstract since you didn't rely on your studies? I did rely on my value study and my notan, what I knew about my flower. I didn't lean on the reference photo so much. But do you know what? Almost every painting, it's interesting because we use the term abstract I think incorrectly a lot of the time. I used to think an abstract was a painting of nothing. You're trying to basically, maybe it's an idea, but it's not a thing. It's not a noun. And actually abstract is really just detaching kind of from the reality of the visual. So anytime we are painting, unless we're painting extreme photorealism, to an extent, we are abstracting our subject. So how abstract you want to go is up to you. And I think there's degrees, if that makes sense. Oh, sorry, Lisa, I was calling you Martin. It's on your own fault, actually, because that's how it comes up in the chat. Patricia says, I'm understanding that you've used indigo for value studies. I use any dark value color will work for a value study. You want it to be a dark value so you get that nice range from white to near black. Okay. Feel free to, if you have more questions that I've missed, pop them up in the chat again. It seems to me I had something else I wanted to share. Yes, I did. And it's from my Instagram. If you're following me on Instagram, you might have seen it already. I'm Angel Fair on Instagram. But today I was talking about how I've been really thinking about the ugliness of our existing work. What do you do when you make something really hideous, and how bad should you feel about it? And so I pulled up, here it is. So I wrote this little quote and I posted it on my Instagram. It said, train yourself to see glimmers of brilliance in your own work. The little things that we do in our paintings, the little thing you did in that study that made you really happy, the brush mark that just, everything else in the painting was bad, but that one brush mark just was like, wow, I love this. Those are future brilliance, future beauties that are going to inform your work in the future. The art you're making today is just a seed. You're just germinating the amazing things you're going to make in the future. That does not mean, I think there's a backwards way to look at this that says, that means everything I'm making today is going to be, I'm going to consider as terrible work in the future. And there's kind of some truth to that, as in, I look at my paintings from 5 years ago and I think, oh, some of that handling, brush handling and the color choices I made were really amateurish. At the same time, there were glimmers of the artist I was going to become in that work. And I am never ashamed of my past work because of how it informs my work today. We want to nourish our unborn ideas. When they come out on your paper now, they're probably going to be ugly and raw and messy. Because now, once they're born, once they're hideous on the page, we fall into the task of refining those things and developing them for the purpose of creating our future work. And the best and most beautiful art you're achieving right now, it can't compare to the amazing things you're going to be creating in the future. We plunge into this place of being messy and uncertain and unfinished. And a lot of the work I create is messy and uncertain and unfinished. I have stacks literally here in the studio. And I have faith and I trust, because I've seen it in my 20-year painting journey, that, good stuff emerges from all that rawness. So I want you to encourage, I want to encourage you with that. Nancy, you have a question, and if you post on your group in Facebook, is that the same group you're referring to? No. I'm not very active on Facebook. We are moving over to this community site, which is fearlessartist.net. It's the site that's linked up when you go into Watercolor Mastery to view the course content. When it says join the discussion here, that is our community group. That is where, as Watercolor Mastery students, we work together and learn in community. I love how you were greeting each other today and recognizing your names and each other's names and being part of this community. That's our goal. That's what we want. And Shelley says, my paintings are full of glimmers. I'm not giving up. Marvelous. Okay, one thing I wanted to mention, and I'm going to post about it in our community, and that is critiques. Where did I put that? Darn it, I wrote it down and I didn't print it. Okay, this is what I want to share. In the next few weeks, as we get into the later stages of Watercolor Mastery, we're past the halfway point now. If you're posting in the group, I am trying to I'm trying to visit the community every weekday, looking at the art that's being posted there, sharing comments and insights when I can. However, there is a chance that if you're posting a project that you're really hoping for feedback on, I might miss it somehow, or I might not see it, or I might not comment directly on that because you've posted other paintings. If you need a direct if you really want an insight from me, not two really, it's just one. If you really want to hear from me, have me coach you on a painting that you're working on, if you're feeling stuck or you just need feedback on what's working and what isn't, you can use a hashtag to get my attention. Hashtag critique. I'm going to post about this in the community. This isn't the only time I'm going to mention it. Hashtag critique. I can search on those hashtags, and that will bring up anything you're asking for my direct critique on. If you're doing warm-ups and studies, you probably don't need a critique on those. That's developmental work. But if you're working on a project and you need some help with your direction, that's where you can throw up that hashtag critique in the comments or in the description, and I will find it there. Jilly's Art asks, do you have any tips for choosing reference photos to do our repetitive work? A no-tan is a really good place to start. Look for good contrast in your photo, strong patterns of light and dark. Look for a really nice armature framework for your painting for the reference photo that will guide a strong painting. If you're working repetitively and you're an abstract artist, that's where you might choose a no-tan and then explore different colors and variations of emphasis to create your painting. It's really about having that good foundation. The good foundation is what makes your painting compelling long term. And so if you can choose a photo like that, the subject matter doesn't really matter. The colors don't matter nearly as much as having that strong foundation of light and dark patterns. So look for those. And so do no-tans. One of the reasons we did the crocus demonstration in week 2 was because it was so compelling as a no-tan. It just looked so good. It looked so good that I made it into a linoleum block print, and I don't even carve linoleum blocks usually. So it was just one of these scenes that just compelled me to want to paint it because of the impact of that foundation. So look for that. Fate Incorporated says, some of my new paints are coming out of the tube separated. Is there anything to be done about that? If it's only a little bit separated, then usually I don't worry about it too much. When I squeeze it into the palette, I stir it with a toothpick until I get everything combined again. If it's really separated, usually the paint manufacturer will honor a return on that. You can contact them directly or the store you purchased the paint at. So it's not supposed to be coming out separated. So you can contact them and ask for a replacement. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up here. Say goodbye. I'm at a workshop tomorrow with my local arts community, and I'm so excited about it. I can't tell you. This is the first time I've been invited to speak to a group of artists in the community. Formerly, I've done a lot of local workshops, but they're almost always to beginners. And this time, I get to teach on abstracting the landscape to some very dedicated artists and I'm excited because it's such a way to contribute and to support the arts community that's really been so supportive of me over the years. My very first watercolor class was taken here in my hometown, and it's really neat to be a part of a family of like-minded artists, and we work in all different mediums. We've got printmakers and oil painters, and it's really fun to get together and talk about how creativity unites us. And one of the reasons that I have our artist community of fearlessartist.net is that we are excited to be developing that into a community of watercolor lovers, and that includes you. Right now, it's just watercolor mastery students, but in June, we're going to open it up and make it available as a monthly membership site where you can be a part of a learning community and also one that collaborates together. I know some of you were commenting that you can see in Watercolor Mastery that there are people in the group who live near to you. And one thing I think is going to be really awesome is that as our group grows, the opportunity to form local arts groups with other watercolor lovers will actually become something that you might be able to do. And I really hope that if you see someone in your area that's another watercolor artist, take the plunge and meet up. Go do a plein air session, or go do some coffee shop sketching, or just get together and walk through a gallery together and get to know each other. One thing that the internet used right is all about building community, and I love that we've been able to do that together as artists all over the world. Living in the north like I do, it's really not a very big arts community, and so I love that I've been able to expand my friendships and meet so many wonderful people through watercolor, and that includes you. So thank you so much for being a part of this. And thanks for being here. I look forward to seeing your work in our community at fearlessartist.net. Watch for your email for week 4 that will come tomorrow, and have a great rest of the day. Bye for now. If I can find the off button. Okay, turning it off. Thanks, everybody.